super excited to talk to everyone tonight about physical fitness for dogs. And I've designed this program to hopefully have something in it for everyone. So whether your dog is an agility superstar to the person who has the dog who has some mobility issues. So with that, let's get right in. Okay, so we'll start with the benefits of exercise. And for a lot of this stuff, we have a lot more evidence in humans than we do in our pets. And so I am going to use humans as a model, and we're going to address those in pets where there is some evidence or not. So the first thing is with better mood and less anxiety. And so exercise in humans definitely has an effect on mood and anxiety levels and is very beneficial for mental health. In dogs, because we can't ask them if they're anxious or not, it's harder to draw a specific line to mood or anxiety, but we definitely know that exercise can help improve bad behaviors. And so if a dog has a lot of chewing or destructive behaviors, a lot of times exercise will definitively help with some behavioral therapy improve those behaviors. Better sleep definitely happens in people. I don't know about you, but my dog sleeps a lot and doesn't seem to have a lot of trouble sleeping. But hopefully it's helping them get better sleep, if not more often. For pain relief, now in studies with people who are older and have a lot of osteoarthritis, they report that when entering into physical fitness programs, they have a lot less pain, they have better function, and they take less pain medication or need less pain medication. Now, in dogs, we think that this is probably true as well. You may have heard stories of people who had an elderly dog that they thought was maybe reaching the end of their lifespan, and they get a new puppy and suddenly that older dog has a second wind or a new lease on life. And it may be because the puppy's bugging them enough that they're getting a little bit more exercise and limbering up, and then that exercise makes them, it makes it easier for them to get around and improves their function. As far as reducing the risk of disease, heart disease and stroke in people is a lot of times due to arteriosclerosis, which dogs and cats don't get as much. There are other heart diseases that they do get that are similar to people, but the typical arteriosclerosis, they don't get. Cancer, however, exercise may help reduce the risk. It's a lot more difficult to determine in dogs and cats because their lifespan is shorter, and so there's less change in duration that can be measured compared to humans who have 80 to 100 years. As far as improving longevity in general, more sedentary lifestyle, especially in older adults, is associated with less longevity. And so we assume that that's probably the truth in dogs as well, especially since mobility is something that we use as a determination of quality of life. And so the more mobile the dog is, the better we feel like their quality of life is. And then as far as injury prevention and reducing falling and improving strength, these ones are fairly easy to apply to dogs. And so we really feel like those improving strength, improving exercise and fitness will help to prevent injuries. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that happens, but we're pretty sure it happens in dogs as well. And if we're going to talk about the benefits, we also have to talk about the risks. And these are just a list of the percent of dogs that had via survey injuries in these specific sports. And so definitely doing physical activity can put you at risk for injury. But we're going to talk about how to ameliorate that risk and how doing specific exercises can actually help decrease risk in the actual sport that the dog is participating in. So at the beginning of any exercise program, you've probably seen the person always has to tell you to consult your doctor before you start any exercise program or entertain any physical fitness type exercise routines. They repeat this on YouTube even today. It used to be on all of the CDs that we used to do at home, and now it's on YouTube even. And so I guess the first thing I would say is listen to your veterinarian. So if you have some specific condition that your dog has that prevents it from doing exercise, usually this is an injury type thing, listen to your veterinarian and follow their specific instructions. I'm going to give you some generalities and some things that are generally safe, with a little bit of commentary on each exercise as far as how safe it is. The other thing we have to do is listen to our dog's behavior. So if we are doing an exercise, even if it's something that you've done forever, so let's say you take your dog for a 1 mile walk every day, and today your dog is balking or stopping or laying down in the grass next to the sidewalk instead of continuing with you. This isn't something that dogs typically do to just say they're lazy or something to that effect. It usually means that something's gone wrong. So dogs can pant really hard when they're getting too hot, and this can change over time. So dogs, for instance, Labradors get a condition called laryngeal paralysis sometimes when they're older, and this is their larynx, or where their vocal cords are, doesn't work as appropriately as it should. And so when they get hot, it's supposed to open that area up so that air can travel back and forth while they're panting very easily. And with laryngeal paralysis, it doesn't open. And so they can't clear their heat as well. And so they may become heat tolerant as they get older if they get that disease. And so it's one of those things where even if you do some specific exercise over and over and over again, and your dog changes their behavior towards that exercise, we definitely need to be paying attention. That picture of the Frenchie in the bottom there is to remind me also that Frenchie's probably pretty darn hot. Dogs with shorter noses don't tolerate the heat and humidity as well either. They just have smaller airways than a dog of their same size, and so they can't clear heat as well either. And so you have to know the weather conditions that you're taking your dog into. Older dogs on ice sometimes don't do well. They can splay their legs out and become injured that way. And super active dogs on ice can slip and fall and have accidents as well. Not to mention ourselves, right? Like, I don't like going out on ice myself if I'm going to walk my dog. And so knowing those conditions can help with both your dog's safety and yours. Knowing your dog's fitness level is also very important. So obviously in that big guy on the upper right there, he's not going to be able to go for a mile walk today. He's going to have to start off shorter. Now, that dog has every capability of becoming able to go for that mile walk, but he can't start out in that place. So we're always going to start dogs off in the easiest situations first and work up to those more difficult fitness levels. And then take any other conditions that your dog might have into account. If they've had injuries previously, if they have osteoarthritis, tendon problems that can flare up, a lot of soft tissue injuries can recur very easily. And so some of these exercises are designed to be very safe and actually prevent re-injury or recurrent injuries. But still, you have to take into account what's going on with your dog at this particular moment in time. All right, so these exercise episodes are designed to be fun. And so how do we make things fun for dogs? Well, we feed them. And so treats are a big portion of this. The problem is we can counteract those really good benefits of exercise if our dogs gain a lot of weight because of all the treats that we're feeding them to do these exercises. So we have to limit the number of treats we give them. You can use dinner So take their kibble that they normally would be eating for the night and use that as their treats for doing the different exercises. My dogs will work for their regular food any day. You can use low calorie treats. You can break any of the bigger treats up into little tiny ones. So they're just getting just enough to do the exercise. You don't want to be giving them a lot more. Another thing you can do is, apparently I am going backwards instead of forwards. Another thing you can do is freeze some peanut butter on a toy. So this is a picture of one of just those hard bone type toys that have little knobbies on the ends. And so I smeared that peanut butter on there and then I freeze it. And then those dogs can't get the peanut butter off very well. So it's almost like the old commercials with how many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Roll? And if you actually licked that sucker, you don't get very much candy off of it at a time, but you can definitely taste it. And so these dogs will lick it, but not be able to clean it off. It'll last actually quite a while for a very small amount of peanut butter. If you don't like the idea of having it on the end of a toy, because that can still be quite messy and it can be messy in your freezer, you can smear it on the inside of a cup. Now, this particular cup that I have a picture of is kind of big and they can sometimes get their whole nose in there, which can then make them messy. But if a lot of people will use little tiny Dixie cups and smear it in there, and that can help because they can't get their nose in it. They can only get their tongue in there a little bit at a time. And so that'll help reduce the amount of calories that they're getting during these episodes. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is warm up. And this depends on the individual dog. If you have a very healthy dog, you can start off with walking or walking to trotting. You can do sit to stand exercises where you tell them to sit and then stand and then sit and then stand, or going all the way down into a down position and then standing up. Those are very easy for healthy dogs and can be used as warm-up exercise. If you have a dog with mobility issues or one that's recovering from an illness that's maybe not getting up very much during the day, then passive range of motion exercise is the one that you want to start off with first. And so passive range of motion is actually just moving their joints so that you flex and extend them, just so that they get a little bit more lubrication. It can provide a little bit of stretch, but you don't want to actively stretch the dog. Just let them go. And I'll give you an example here with Cece, my model dog here. She's very tense and she's like all squinched up. And so I don't want to force her, but you see, like if I pet her belly, how she'll then stretch out her hip and stretch out her knee. And I'm just petting in just the area just in front of her leg. And so then she stretched it out herself. And so this needs to be something that is fun, that they're not too worried about, and that it shouldn't hurt at all. And this can help make them a little bit more mobile than when they do get up and start to do these exercises. So you need to definitely start with easy. So wherever your dog is in its fitness journey, you start with the easiest stuff. All right, so balance and agility. These exercises, especially balance, can be done in most dogs, even with injuries, and they help improve proprioception. What proprioception is knowing where the limbs are in space, and so you can be more precise. So think of it as coordination or motor skills, sort of like if you are learning to draw, then the more you practice drawing, the better at drawing you are. Well, the same goes for the more they practice balancing and placing their feet in very specific places, the better coordinated their muscles and joints and eyes all work together to place their feet appropriately. This actually goes towards very specific joint proprioception as well. And so all muscles or all joints have muscles, tendons, and ligaments that work together to help stabilize that joint. And so it moves only in the direction it's supposed to move in. And so the more coordinated dogs are, the better they are at protecting their own joints. And if they have an injury, this is the first thing you do as a recovery for that injury is balance and agility exercises, because that proprioception actually goes away with an injury. And so they have to relearn it. And if you don't want them to get injured again, it's good for them to relearn this proprioception. And in people, this is a big portion of any rehab program after a sports injury, and it's also a big portion of their conditioning. Okay, so we're going to start with at-home, really easy balancing exercises. Now, dogs with osteoarthritis, dogs with tendon and ligament injuries, they can all do this. If your dog's recovering from an abdominal surgery or a thoracic surgery, they can do this. Really, the only dogs that can't do these balancing exercises are ones where you don't want them to weight bear at all on that limb. So like if you are conservatively managing a fracture, for instance, then we would not do this exercise, but almost all other dogs can do it at this easy level. So we're going to start off with Cece here, who has no injuries, and we're going to show. So my assistant there is pushing toward her left side and pushing to where she actually will lift up her right leg and shift onto her left, but she has to actually switch her balance and maintain her current foot position. So she can't change her feet. If she changes her feet and actually steps to the side, then this is actually too much pressure. I'm not sure why the video stopped there. Well, apparently it's not going to replay either. And so you don't want them to actually sidestep across the material. You just want them to shift their weight. And so this makes them send signals to all of those muscles to stabilize. Much like if we're doing a plank and you do something as a weight shifting during that plank, it upsets your balance a little bit, and all your muscles have to accommodate for that. And so in this particular case, Cece is only being balanced on her back end. And so we would do this in all directions. So she would have to have balancing towards the left, balancing towards the right, and then the same for her front limbs as well. And so that's the easiest. And then we're going to go to Belle here, who has a right hind limb lameness. She has really severe osteoarthritis in her right hock. And you can see that she is less weight bearing on it. And so she's just getting a little bump towards her right side there. And again, this is affecting her hind limbs, but not her forelimbs. So we'd have to do it in her forelimbs as well. But it's not enough to make her actually walk to the side, just enough to make her shift her weight. All right, so now let's make it just a little bit harder. So this is still pretty easy, but it's a little bit harder, and you'll actually see Belle start to cheat. So she's switching her weight, but as you can see, as time goes by, she keeps leaning into Jack, my assistant there. And see, now she's really leaning on him. And so she's cheating. So it's a lot easier for her to put less weight on that right side if she is leaning that far. And so dogs are cheaters, just like people are. And so you do have to wait. And so what Jack should do is actually stand up so that his body's not as against her as it is, and she won't be able to lean on him as much. Here, I can replay this video real quick so that you can see her feet better. So this is her leaning super far. So, and now she's a little bit better, less leany. She just gets more and more leany as the video goes on. She shifts so that she doesn't have to shift that weight as much. And so they're definitely good at cheating. Okay, so now we're going to go on to moderate balancing. So these are just shoe boxes that I had at my house. You could use blocks of wood. If you want to go expensive, you can buy these little discs that are filled with air that they used for people for balancing or for different lunging type activities that have a little bit of instability to them. You can do it with any of those things, but it's a lot harder to balance on something than it is just on the regular floor. And so if your dog needs to master the easy and easy plus before you move to this type of exercise. And then once you do get to this, and once you get to balancing on these type blocks, you can still do just that really small nudge to try to get them to weight shift. And then you can add in a little bit of strength to the balancing. So this perturbs her balance, and it also makes her use her abdominal muscles to twist. And you should do it on both sides. And I probably should have left it in, but I cut the video when he moves her head to the other side because she falls off all the boxes. And so what you need to do is, it needs to be a safe environment. So fails like that are okay, and don't scare them. So it definitely needs to be in a way where it is safe as you move to the next level. And so this is more difficult balancing exercise, and we'll show you here. This is back to Cece, who's pretty fit, and so I have the treat, so that's why Cece's so intent on me instead of Jack. And so Jack has his hand under her chest, so he's really supporting her when she's leaning super forward like that. But as soon as he tips her back, you can see the ball start to shake because that's her balancing. And so he's just tipping her forward and then tipping her back so that she has to balance, and then back and forth. And as she gets better, he can let her take more and more of her weight and give her less and less support. And you can also see down there in the bottom, hopefully you can see his foot is actually holding the ball. So the ball can't escape and go anywhere. He's holding it with his feet so that it's not going to run away with her. And so this is a way to start off with the ball, but you can see how as she gets better and better at this, you could give her less and less support to the ball until she can stand on the ball herself. If we move on now to agility, this is a video of really easy agility, and this is just obstacles on the floor. But Belle doesn't want to step on any of these toys, so she is going to shorten her gait or lengthen it however she needs to so that she has more precision in where she places her feet. And so she's having to think about it. She's having to use her balance and her proprioception to make those changes in gait. And so you can do this very slowly with your dog if they have mobility issues. This is a really, really good thing to do very slowly with them, and then increase in speed rather than increase the obstacles. But if you want to move to a moderate level, you can increase the height of the obstacles. And so these are something called cavalettis, which the picture on the left is for sale. You can buy those at on Amazon. They're used in human physical fitness as well, and so they can be dual purpose. They're adjustable in height, so depending on the size of your dog, you can adjust it or where they are in their fitness. I, on the picture on the right, just used some boxes that I had at home, some shoe boxes, and then some boxes to block Belle so that she couldn't not go over the obstacles, because otherwise, again, dogs will cheat. They'll go around them if they can. And so to make sure that she went across the boxes, we put up a little bit of a barrier. Now this will take a little bit of trial and error. So you can see she went across there. It took probably 3 or 4 times of me taking her across to figure out exactly how far apart the boxes needed to be for her to be successful, because it gets harder and harder the closer those boxes are together, or the higher the obstacles are. And so it took a little bit of trial and error to get the boxes the right width for her to be successful. And then you do this 10, 20 times in a row. And then next day you do it again. And if she starts to get more comfortable with it, she's pretty slow now, she's stopping, she's looking in between the boxes, etc. Once she starts to be like, no, I got this, then you start to make it a little higher, either by raising the boxes, by putting them closer together, by putting them unequal distances apart, all of those things can make it then just that little bit harder. You can also use outdoor areas for agility, and things like rocks, where they have to go from rock to rock, like crossing streams and things like that you can use. You can use deflated air mattresses to make like a wobbly type unsure footing area with small obstacles on it. And then here's Cece again with a balance beam. So she's using balance, but she also has to have agility because she has to know where her feet are. Now, this is her first time across it. And so Jack over there on the right and Cheney on the left is actually holding the board so that it doesn't wiggle. So even though it's on 2 wooden boxes, as Cece crossed initially, it would start to wiggle. And so she needs some help. But as she improves, then we would be able to let that board go, and that small amount of wiggling wouldn't bother her or would challenge her and make sure that her agility is getting better. All right. So strength and stamina, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between stamina and endurance. So endurance is doing an activity over a long period of time, but that activity could be at a low level. So like, for instance, walking for 20 miles, you have to have a bit of endurance, but you're not sprinting. Stamina is more like sprinting for as long as you can do it. And so you might not be able to go 20 miles at a sprint. You might only be able to go a quarter of a mile if you're like me, or maybe even just 50 yards. And so that's your stamina. So your maximal capacity is stamina, and then just a low level exercise is endurance over time. So strength is very much related to stamina. And so by strengthening their muscles, we should be improving their stamina as well. This is really helpful in increasing mobility, and it's very helpful in maintaining a functional range of motion. And so if we can get these type exercises in dogs that have mobility issues, oftentimes we can greatly increase their quality of life. Increased strength also can help with pain control, because again, you're helping to stabilize your joints better. So you're less likely to tweak your arthritic knee or have another episode of tendonitis or something like that. And then also strength has been shown for sure to decrease injuries. Here's the thing, not all strength behaviors are welcome. So digging is a great way for dogs to increase the strength in their forelimbs, but it's probably not one we want to encourage. Same with pulling on the leash and chewing and destructive behaviors. They actually get quite a bit of trunk and core strength by chewing and shaking their head. So you definitely can do things like tug of war and those kind of things that can help strengthen their neck and chest muscles. But any of that destructive behavior definitely does improve strength, but we might not want to encourage. Instead, what we're going to do is encourage our strength-based exercises. And really, a lot of the strength exercises are based in sit to stands, down to stands, and side down to stands. So what that is essentially just having the dog sit and then stand, and then sit and then stand, and doing it over and over again. The same with down to stand. So it is not a down that goes to a sit first. It's a down that goes all the way down, so to the laying down position, and then all 4 limbs pushing up to be in the standing position. And then side down to stand is where they're actually rolled onto their side. So they'd be completely flat on their side. That makes them use their trunk muscles and abdominal muscles to move to a sternal position or an upright position before then they push up from a down to a stand. And so that just adds that little component of the trunk muscles in there. Here's the thing, form really matters. And so if your dog doesn't like to sit straight, it can help them cheat or just use one leg and less of their injured leg. And you can use walls or furniture to encourage them to use their form. Or if you have a dog that is having trouble with mobility, you can also use a harness to assist until they're strong enough to push up on their own. So like if they are having trouble, for instance, pushing with their rear limbs, there are harnesses that you can use where you just give them just a little bit of help and they push themselves, and you just give them that little bit that allows them to get all the way up. And then you let them lower themselves down as well. And that is also just as strengthening. So if you have one that can't get themselves up at all, you can actually lift them up yourselves and let them lower themselves down. And that's also strength training. Now, if your dog is sitting funny, then you should see if you think that they are actually having some pain or lameness. This guy, for instance, is not in a position to push directly up because his knee hurts. And so because his knee hurts, he doesn't want to bend it all the way to where his hock hits his butt. And so because of that, he really can push up with it and keep his muscles strong, but he doesn't want to bend it as much. And so sometimes for some of those dogs, we don't make them either go all the way down to a sit, they go halfway down and then can come up, or we're treating their knee first, and seeing if we can't get that to heal. Now, in a lot of dogs, we can treat their cruciate disease conservatively. And if that's the case, then we may also be okay with them cheating a little bit. So starting off without the leg completely under them and allowing them to push up or use the other leg at first as much, because they're still using that limb to get up, at least some. And so we know that it's going to improve over time. And so we'll accept a little cheating in the beginning sometimes. All right. So those base exercise are really where you start out with easy. And then you can do a couple others that are easy to a lot of healthy dogs, like rollovers. If your dog's trained to roll over, that's really good core trunk muscle use. And then hills and inclines. So when you're on your walk, going up hills are really good. You can do inclines on the treadmill, and dogs can be trained to go on a treadmill, and there's nothing wrong with that in the winter, especially if you have a very active dog that needs that for their mental health, then definitely you can use a treadmill. Now, this is an example of side crunches here. So Belle's just in her side, and Jack's got her treat maybe a little bit far. There you go. And then so she's using mostly her trunk muscles. Now she's going to cheat here and put her arm out and just use her leg as a little bit of a crutch there. And again, at the very beginning, that's okay for her to do. And then in the end, it's you try to get them without that cheating. All right, so if we're going to go to the moderate level, again, we're still using those sit to stands, and you put their rear end there on a pillow or something that's less stable. It shifts their weight a little bit forward, and it makes it a little bit of a different muscle action for them to use. And so I'm going to show you a little bit of a video of Belle here, because again, she's going to cheat. See how she just worked her way off the pillow instead of actually standing up. And so some of these things can be extremely frustrating as you're going through. And although the training aspects and the treat aspects and the dog having fun, this can be a huge bonding experience, doing all of these exercises and strength training at home, but definitely it can also be frustrating. Here's Cece doing sit-ups. And this exercise, if you have a dog that's prone to back disease, like a Frenchie or a Dachshund that might be prone to disc disease, this wouldn't be recommended for your dog. There's some controversy as to whether strengthening those back and abdominal muscles is really good and helps prevent those disc ruptures, or whether this exercise would predispose to it. So we err on the side of caution at this point and say don't do it. Now you can see Cece cheat in that she stands up, because for her it's a lot easier to balance standing than it is in that sitting position, because she has to use her abdominal muscles a little bit less. You can also do, you can also do strength with TheraBands also at home. And this can help strengthen core and leg muscles. I would say it's moderate if you use them above the knee and above the elbow. And these are just examples of how you can use them. Here's another video. That apparently is not going to play. But it is essentially Belle walking by with the TheraBands around all 4 legs, and which can help strengthen all of them all at the same time. And so where it gets more advanced with using TheraBands, and where I don't recommend most people using them at home, is below the elbow or knees, because it starts to get more pressure on individual joints when you go low like that. And so typically I think you need more training to do those really low TheraBand positions. And so I think that that's one thing that even though you'll find them on YouTube and stuff like that, that I would stay away from unless you're really experienced using them. Okay, great. So here's sort of safer than TheraBands, but an advanced way to both strengthen and increase balance at the same time. And so that dog is sitting on what's called a canine fit disc. And so these are bigger than the small ones that you can buy for people, obviously, because that's a Labrador sized dog that's sitting on that one. But a Labrador can fit on these discs. They're filled with air, and so they're mushy and can go any which way. And how you start these dogs out on them is either forelimbs or hind limbs individually on them, and then you have them keep adjusting, so go on and off, or you have them have their back end on the disc, and then you walk in a circle around so that they have to keep adjusting to look at you. And then you work it to where they have all 4 feet on the disc, and then you walk around in a circle and they have to keep adjusting to look at you. And then once they've mastered that, you can get them to potentially sit up on these discs. Once they've done that, then even a big dog where you can't physically help them on a ball, you potentially could then advance to being on one of those TheraBalls. And so dogs can actually do quite a bit of balancing with a super strong core. And there are a ton of videos on YouTube with these dogs on these discs like this, and how to train them and how to go in a step-by-step manner to use these discs that you can look up on YouTube. So I talked a little bit about the differences between stamina and endurance, but once you have good stamina, you also will have a little bit better endurance. And how we can increase that endurance is by increasing the frequency that we do these exercise sessions, the duration of them, so the number of repetitions within that session, or the intensity of it. So like, for instance, if you are walking, having your dog walk across obstacles, you can have them walk faster across the obstacles, so that addition of speed can make them have a harder time at it and readjust a little bit, and they have to learn to be a little bit better that way. So the other thing is I know people don't want to hear this, but walking in the snow versus the sand, or versus regular can make a difference. And so this actually first video is a video of a dog walking, but without me being able to control it, it's going to be hard for you to see. But if you play that video and watch her feet, they don't get very high. She has very low feet here. Yeah, it flashes by a little bit too fast. But if you see if you can pause it like right in the middle as she's walking by. There you go. So see how her paw isn't getting very high. She's not working very hard. And then if you escape out of that video and click forward there, the next video is the snow. So if you play this one, you can see that she's moving her rear legs to where her knees are going up past her side, and her wrist or carpus is coming all the way up to even with her chest. And so this is like high knees, right? You and I doing high knees, but it's still low impact. So if you have a dog with osteoarthritis or again, mobility issues, this helps strengthen their legs because they're having to lift them so high. It improves their range of motion, but it's doing it in a very low impact way. And you can do this in sand, you can do it in water, you can do it in high grass. All of those will make them lift those legs up really high. And it's potentially a little bit more interesting for them to walk in the snow than it is to just do a million cavalettis or obstacles. And then the other thing that I just want to point out when you're doing and you want your dog to have more endurance and more stamina is also cross-train them, especially if they are in a sport like agility. Running them on the obstacles is obviously a very, very good exercise for them, and it helps with their training, but their overall physical fitness and for injury prevention in people, cross-training is a huge win for the animal. So it not only keeps them physically fit, it trains their muscles in different directions. It helps tendons and ligaments to be stronger. And so doing that with swimming, running, and long walks is huge. The other thing is with swimming, it's another way to make exercises that would be really high impact, like fetch, low impact. So you can use swimming as a low impact exercise. And so this is just a video of Belle, who has that severe osteoarthritis. And because the water, even when she's walking in the water, it's taking force off of that limb because it's making her more buoyant. So even though she's running here on the side, when she gets back to the shore, it's not nearly as much impact on those joints. And so swimming can be absolutely fabulous. And then we need to cool down, right? So you can go to a walk if you've been doing something more exertional. You can do sit to stands, also massage. And a lot of dogs really, really like massage. It's not the super deep massage sometimes people like. It's usually not quite so pressure inducing, but most dogs really do like massage. And then as far as stretching your dog, we typically don't recommend it very much. It's controversial in people as to whether stretching actually improves flexibility and whether it is beneficial or not in the long run for injury prevention. We all know that flexibility is good, and the more flexible a person is, the less injured they get, but it's not directly evident that stretching is actually helping that. And so because of that, and because dogs can't tell you when to stop or when it hurts as well, we usually say probably stretching, unless you are extremely familiar with your dog, is not recommended. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties. I'd also like to thank my kids, Jack and Cheney, for helping me shoot these videos, and my dogs, Belle and Cece, for being the stars of them. And then Lauren, Scott, and Megan, who put all of these educational events together. they're just absolutely fabulous and saved the day today.
Well, thank you so much. That was great. Let's jump into questions because I know there are a lot of great ones that have been coming in. So you actually just touched on agility a little, and someone asked if there are any concerns for dogs that do agility training and trialing in terms of their long-term effects. So if they're really active in those sports.
So that is absolutely fantastic question that we do not know the answer to. And so, so I'm just going to give you my opinion about it. And that is really, in general, if your dog loves agility, if you love agility and it's part of that bonding that you do with your dog, then I think it is 100% worth it. Typically, dogs do not get osteoarthritis from just exercise. It typically has to come with an injury. And so of course, no one wants their agility dog to be injured, but there are some higher risks in that sport versus just taking walks, right? But I'm going to say, if you love that sport and your dog loves that sport, then it's worth that risk.
Okay. Great. And then the next question is, how do we know what is the right amount of physical activity for our dog? And this can vary from walks or being out and using that chuck it toy that throws balls further, just kind of any physical activity.
Oh, so that's a great question also. Very dog dependent and somewhat difficult, but it really has to do with how sore your dog gets and watching it in that activity. So for instance, a really fit dog that you play chuck it with every day can probably go half hour to an hour of retrieving that ball. And you just essentially have to use your time schedule as one of the barriers. And then also watch the dog. So there are some dogs that will, for instance, bloody their paw pads because they are running so hard and stopping at the end and things like that. So you just have to monitor your particular dog if they are that driven. And sometimes you have to stop the activity. But I mean, dogs can exercise for a long period of time if they work up to it. And so it's very much watching your dog, watching their reaction, seeing how hot they are, how much trouble they're having breathing, etc. In an effort to sort of stop that activity. The other thing is if they have a lot of osteoarthritis and they're super sore the next day, then next time go shorter until you find that sweet spot where they're not sore the next day, but they still get to play.
Sure. Okay. You talked a lot about core exercises. So this question is, how effective or useful are weighted conditioning vests for dogs?
So that's a good question also. And for core conditioning where you're doing something that is non-impact, so like sit to stands, laying down to stand, I would say that's advanced for that dog. Or if you're doing balancing with a weight vest, I think all of those are okay. And they're just more advanced level exercises. But as far as like going for walks or runs with a weighted vest, I would not do that because that's higher concussive forces on the actual joints. And so I wouldn't use it in any activity that had impact, but in those strengthening exercises that don't use impact, you totally could use a weighted vest.
Okay, great. How should an exercise program change from puppyhood to when your dog is a senior?
Again, it is very much watching your dog and what they can do, and it depends on their injuries. So as an example, I know one dog that went for 10-mile runs with its owner until it got to be about 8 or 9, and then those runs went to 5 miles with the owner, and then by the time that dog was 12, it was down to about 3 miles until pretty much the runs had to be cut out. Now, those decisions along the way were made by watching the dog, seeing how it tolerated the runs, really wanted to go for runs. And so the owner didn't want to cut them out, even though the dog did have other injuries along the way and things like that. But you just really have to be aware of what your dog can do and back things off as they age and as they get injuries that make it prudent to do so.
Okay. This is less about injury, but we did have a couple questions of dogs with different abilities, because one dog that an owner has is deaf, another is blind, and then someone's asking about modifications too for a dog that's missing a front leg. So what are the types of things that they can do to communicate with their dogs and help them?
So let's talk about the amputee first. A lot of these exercises like sit to stands, down to ups, all of those are super good for the remaining legs, and shouldn't make the whatever leg is taking on the brunt. So depending on whether it's a forelimb or rear limb amputation, it shouldn't predispose the other limbs to injury. So typically we think of the other limbs getting injured for more high impact things, but the strengthening and balancing and agility exercises that we're talking about shouldn't be that way. So those will actually help strengthen the ligaments, tendons, etc. in those other limbs. But the exercises are going to start off harder, even from the very beginning. And so you have to be more patient, and there may not be as many repetitions at the very beginning, and you might have to work up for repetitions. If you start to see those legs like jiggle, that means they're getting tired. So if you're doing sit to stands and those back limbs because they're missing one, so one back limb is left and so they're standing with one leg, you'll start to see those muscles quiver, and that's, hey, time to stop. As far as dogs that are deaf, they have an excellent way to use hand signals, and they'll pay attention to your hands and wherever the food is, and they'll pay attention that way. And so you can use hand signals and where your hand is in space to help guide them. And so deaf dogs are a lot easier to still train and work with these exercises than blind dogs are, because blind dogs are very good at adapting in their own environment and understanding like where things are in a known environment. But as soon as you change up those environmental cues, they may get nervous about it. So if it's a small breed dog that you can actually support like under their chest, then you can do some of the balancing things with that support. So like for instance, on one of those therapy balls where you just let them touch their feet down and take a little bit of weight, and hopefully give them treats at the same time so that they don't get scared about it, but they're still taking on some of their weight. The sit to stands are still going to be great. And same with the down to stand. Those are still going to be fine.
Okay, great. A little bit more on balancing. I know you showed that video with Cece on the ball, the larger one. What do you suggest for larger dogs who you can't actually put up on a big ball like that to help them with their balancing? And then for all types of dogs, how long should you do different balancing exercises before progressing to sort of the next step?
Yeah, they have to really master the next steps or the step that they're on before you go to the next one. So they have to look like it's easy for them. And so you perturb them, they have no issues. You make them move their head in all directions and they have no issues still standing there. And then you can go to the next step. As far as the big dogs on the ball, you can get that disc that I talked about that they can sit on. And do that first before the ball, because you can't support them. So you have to really be sure that they're going to be ready to do the ball. Also, you can either use wood blocks to brace the ball, or they sell rings that actually will make the ball not rolly and deflate it quite a bit. and start that way with them on it, because as they mash it down, it gets flatter and it's a little bit easier then. And so you can start a little bit slower that way too, when you're advancing the dog from like one of those big discs to a ball.
Okay. Probably have time for one more question. So a couple of people asked about limits related to heat and humidity when you're outside with your dog, and then the opposite end of that when it's really cold. What are the kind of limits that you would recommend to people, and does it vary by coat thickness or other kind of breed specific factors?
So the majority of the breed specific factors are airway. So if they are the short-nosed breeds, they just have a smaller airway. They can't release heat as well as other dogs their same size. As far as coat goes, dogs that are double coated with heavy coats obviously have much hotter and don't tolerate the heat as well as dogs that have really thin coats. But with water and paying attention to that, they can still usually exercise even though it's the summer. As far as the heat and humidity goes, typically like on the news, they'll say whether the heat humidity is at different levels that would say caution for people in exercising. And so they give those levels on the news. So if they're cautioning people at those, then definitely that's probably not the time to go on the 10-mile run with your dog or something to that effect. So when it's uncomfortable for you outside, it's also uncomfortable for them. And then in your particular dog, it's really watching their behavioral cues. Like, are they stopping on the walk? Are they really, really panting hard? Those kind of things. Oh,
Great.
If it's too cold.
Yeah.
So too cold is harder because, man, dogs don't seem to mind the cold as much as I do. So I want to say, if you're too cold, then it's too cold for your dog, but that's not entirely true. And so dogs do tolerate the cold very well. Now, some of the smaller breed dogs will do things like lift up paws because their individual toes are getting cold. If they're not tolerating the walk because they're clearly uncomfortable, then I would say probably, take one for the team that day and head on inside. And so again, I would use their behavioral cues. When we had the polar vortex a few years ago, that did get cold even for dogs that are used to being outside. And you don't want to push them so hard that they get frostbite or something like that. But usually dogs will tell you when they're not enjoying it anymore and they want to come inside, or they're lifting their paws up and saying, hey, my toes are cold. So they'll tell you, they'll give behavioral cues.